morning, good afternoon and good evening. You are watching the Paris Fintech Forum Communities video interview series. I'm Elliott Gotkine and today I'm joined by the CEO of the European Banking Federation, Mijs. Great to see you again.
Great to be here.
Okay, so before we get cracking, let's learn a little bit more about the European Banking Federation. Okay, so Wim, you represent the banking sector in Europe. Is that a fair summary?
That is a fair summary. Indeed, we represent the banks in the EU, but also including United Kingdom and the EFTA countries, so Liechtenstein, Norway and Iceland and Switzerland. So that's indeed a fair summary.
Okay, and what's your top priority right now? What's the most pressing concern for Europe's banks?
Now, over the last 6 months, I would say there are a number of important priorities. The first one is indeed the implementation of the banking package, which is actually the implementation of Basel in the European Union. So that's de facto the final part of financial stability from the crisis of 2008. Took us some time, but we're here. But more importantly, of course, there is now the digital transformation, and that literally is about everything. It's not only about offering new products or consumers having different habits or wanting different services. It's also about the use of data. How do we use data and how will banks use data and what will happen if big tech and fintech come into that realm. And then it's also about digital currencies. The hottest thing right now is central bank digital currencies like the digital euro and the digital pound. But these, of course, concern us very, very much. But then there is also the importance of transitioning our economy to net zero. Banks are quite close to the clients, so they have an important role to play in helping clients to get to net zero and to transform our economy into a more sustainable one. And finally, there are a number of issues around anti-money laundering. There is a new package and an action plan for anti-money laundering that we're quite active in, actually. But of course, with the invasion of Ukraine, a new list of priorities appeared. First, banks need to implement the sanctions, and we want to do that as best as we can. And of course, that is sometimes easy, sometimes complex, but we are in constant contact with the authorities on that. Secondly, cyber risk has gone up with the war near. So we are very much involved in closely monitoring the situation on the cyber side. And then, of course, there is a huge amount of refugees who will need to open a bank account, who will need to have access to money. So we're helping the authorities with that as well.
Wow, lots on the plate of Europe's banks. And of course, open banking is another thing that's been going on the past few years. It's been incredibly popular among consumers and, of course, the many fintechs that have built their businesses on the back of it. I assume this has also been a kind of key issue for you in recent years. What's your take? Has open banking gone too far? Has it not gone far enough? Have the regulators got it just about right?
Well, PSD2 was a landslide, as predicted. It opened the payment system to new entrants. And actually, many people were looking towards fintech. The Paris Fintech Forum, very important and still quite influential, I think, in the exchanges. And if you look now, that has worked out very well. Because if you look at fintechs, they came with parts of the value chain of banks and they came up with better solutions, new solutions, and that works. So if you look at the way banks now work with fintechs, you see there's either cooperation or they bought a license, but that's gone very well. Now we get a bit further with open data and open data economy, where you do not have fintech startups, but where you get big tech stepping in. And the difference between banks and big tech is banks always had lots of information, but that was always information that is needed for the transaction. You want to buy a house, I need to know how much you earn, but that's all that I do with it. Whereas, of course, big techs has built their business on data analysis. Now, going forward is a big question on where you want to go here. There is a reason why banking or financial services are heavily supervised on one hand. And there is also indeed the need to develop new services. So in my view, the question is still open and the work has yet to be done.
Okay, so look, we've heard about the European Banking Federation. Let's now get to know Wim a little bit better. So Wim, you're a Dutchman. Tell me about the young Wim and what he wanted to be when he was growing up.
The young Wim wanted to play in a band. Very simple. I played guitar since I was 11. And by the time I was 15, I was in bands. And by the time I was 18, I played quite a lot of time. So it took my parents quite some convincing to get me to go to university. And actually, that worked out pretty well. Because yes, I studied law, international and European law. But also, if there's one place where you can play almost every evening, that is university. So I was able to combine music with studying law. And indeed, I never thought I would ever work for a bank. I did human rights, European law, international public law, and I started out as a teacher of international public law. But then I was hired by a bank actually to be a competition lawyer, and from then on I was fascinated by everything that comes together in a bank. It is technology, it is money, it is services, it's people. So I've enjoyed so many aspects of it.
I can just imagine you with like hair down to your shoulders, kind of head banging, that kind of band, that kind of guitarist.
My hair, when I still had it, would not grow down, but everywhere, go to everything. The Art Garfunkel style hair.
Okay.
And
good.
yes, I had that. But I would like. Very much into, at that time, blues and classic rock music. But at university, I was in one of the bands who would play at all the parties. So that opens you to what I call dance classic music from all that time. So if you wake me up at night and asked to play anything from chic to any other dance music from the 1980s and 90s, I just grab my guitar and do it.
Okay, well, next time we're in Paris, I'm going to get Laurent to make sure that you're part of the entertainment the night before the event. But look, you mentioned your first, I think it was ABN AMRO that you went to first of all. You were there for 14 years, and then you kind of jumped ship almost with apparent perfect timing right before the global financial crisis, in which ABN AMRO played a pretty big role in Europe at least. And then you became the CEO of the Netherlands Bankers Association. So you were still in the thick of things when the global financial crisis struck. Was that the toughest year of your career?
Well, actually, the few years afterwards, the step from ABN AMRO to being CEO of the Dutch Banking Association was an interesting one, because many of my colleagues said that I either knew ahead or was extremely lucky. I always say it's the one, but of course it's the other. And then in the Dutch Banking Association, I thought I just had to do some change management. But then indeed the financial crisis came and banks weren't too popular. And I stood fully in the wind there. So the difficult years were not so much 2007, 2008, but 2009 and 2010, when the real fallout was there. And you really saw the effect that the crisis had on people, on the economy, on society, and these were really tough years.
Right, and you and I have met a few times. You always seem very nice and friendly, I have to say. But I understand you can also be, very opinionated. What's it like to lead, a federation with so many kind of political constraints, when you are quite partial to kind of getting your views heard and kind of taken into account?
Well, I have a very simple view. I absolutely hate the color gray. So if you want to be a federation, I will say that to my members as well, if you want a federation, you need a strategy and a mandate to speak, because the only way in which you can engage is not when you say, I don't know. You can be divided, you can be wrong, you can be right, all true, but you have to have the conviction. So with the European Bank Federation, we're always quite pro-European, we're also always pragmatic, and I always want technical knowledge, technical understanding. And what we try to do is, of course, we realize the public objective of a regulation, but then you try to discuss it, that it both meets the objectives of the public objectives, but also enables the industry to work. So you indeed, as you've met me a few times before, you know that I will not be grey, and I will also not shy away from a discussion, and I will absolutely avoid having nothing to say.
Well, that's very helpful for an interview like this. So look, a key part of this discussion is to get your take on the future of finance. But first, we're going to take a very quick break, after which we're going to continue our conversation with the European Banking Federation CEO, Wim Mijs. Welcome back, and don't forget, if you're not already a full member of our community, everything you need to join can be found at www.parisfintechforum.com. And now, Wim, let's talk about the future of finance. How would you describe the relationship between banks and fintechs?
Well, I said that has changed. In my opinion, people were way too afraid of fintechs, and I also found fintechs very interesting that said, startups that said, tomorrow there will be no banks because we will come with the final solution, or Bill Gates that we said we do need banking, but do we need banks? All of this, in my view, was wrong. What we do need is innovation. And the banks were relatively conservative. And actually, to be honest, some of their clients really like banks to be conservative, because when banks get hip, banks take risks, and people don't like that. Having said that, on technology, you really want to do something. And I think that my most retweeted tweet ever was when I tweeted, if it's not on my phone, I don't need it, because I really want banking to be completely accessible through my phone. The way I look at it now, a few years later, you see that banks and fintechs have found each other. For a simple reason is banks needed innovation, needed a fresh view, needed sometimes people, geniuses who came up with great ideas in the value chain. And fintech startups needed two things, money and volume. And banks had clients and they had money. So they have found each other. And actually, I think the marriage is pretty good.
Okay. So look, I mean, many fintechs have thrived by doing, many of the things that banks do, but without having to be a bank and hold regulatory capital and abide by other kind of, restrictions. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, what we always say, but it's a little bit a platitude in my view, is same service, same rules, same supervision. But it is right, because, again, as I said, the problem with banking and financial services is that if you make a mistake or if an accident happens, it has far-reaching consequences. We've all seen that in the crisis of 2008. And so there is a reason that it is heavily regulated and heavily supervised. Having said that, it should not stifle innovation. And that's why I think that the cooperation and the joint ventures with banks helps well. And indeed, if you stay out of banking, it's fine. But most fintechs in the end want to get in financial services. And when they go from the startup phase and become mature, then obviously you have to play the game according to the rules that were set.
Right, and I guess it's to do, as you mentioned, these banks being systemically important, that if there is a problem, then it's going to, have very major and grave repercussions. But what about fintechs like Stripe, for example, which is worth more than, many banks in Europe? Do you think that some fintechs, when they get to a certain size, even if they're not banks per se, that they ought to be regulated more closely?
They need to be regulated according to risk and not according to success. It's great that they grow so big and that they're so successful. What I find actually worrying is that, you have a lot of geniuses in Europe. You have people developing beautiful businesses. They go from startup, but the moment they go to scale up, the moment they go over 20 million euros, they move to the United States, and that is something that I worry about, and actually our political leaders should worry about, because apparently the atmosphere, if you become successful and become big, the investment atmosphere is not right. Again, for me, success is not a reason to overregulate or regulate or supervise. Risk is.
Okay, well, I should say that, for example, French President Emmanuel Macron did, I think he had a target for like something like 25 unicorns, and kind of, met that target, quite a bit earlier. So perhaps things are changing, maybe not as fast as they ought to. You talked about the kind of marriage between fintechs and banks working pretty well right now. Where do you see things going in the future in terms of this marriage? Is it a marriage for life, or just one of convenience that after a few years will end up in divorce?
No, I don't think that with the startups, I think they found their place. And again, the business model can be either licensing, and then you can grow quite big and successful and develop further. And this licensing will continue, or you really integrate it in a bank. And then, of course, the question is not so much one of business, but also of people. Where the question is, will the culture in fintech and the culture in banks meet? Because I can imagine that the people who set up a fintech startup are getting bored after some years. So it's not the company that will leave, but it may be the people leaving and setting up a different venture. The difference in the future of banking is indeed the entrance of fintech. In my view, that will be quite a new phase and a new momentum.
Okay, and I mean, you talked about startups, fintechs, when they get to a certain size, decamping from Europe to the United States. But how would you compare banks in Europe? I mean, you talked about them being quite conservative in terms of their embrace of technology. But so how would you compare European banks with those in the US and other parts of the world in terms of their embrace or aversion to technology, or in terms of how conservative they are?
Well, in the diversity of banking in Europe is vast, but you really have some banks really going ahead and putting their full strategy on becoming fully digital. Of course, that has to do with their client base. If you're an international platform bank, it's much more attractive to go fully digital and to deliver services than when you're a local or regional bank with a relatively limited clientele. But if you compare to the United States, you will see similar developments. If you look at the normal local state banks and savings banks, of which there are very, very many, they are relatively slow in the uptake of new technology, because that's not their clients are not very interested. But of course, there are front runners in the United States as well. I see it similar. What is always interesting is to look at China and have these huge. See, if you look at overhead, if you look at a billion customers with 1,500 people managing the central computer center, then these are vast numbers. That's where change is really coming from. But you also see that the Chinese leaders set limits to the growth of their banks, and that's their issue.
Okay, just briefly, because I want to move on to the next section, Wim, describe to me the future of banking. No branches, maybe, no cash, just mobile wallets and crypto. What are you seeing in your crystal ball?
It's good. It's great that you think that I have a crystal ball. That helps me a lot. But for me, all normal banking services will be digital, in my view. It's what I do. As I always say, I work for banks, but I'm always never there. Well, I'm never there, because I want to do everything online. I manage the finances for my elderly parents of 91 and 93, and I do this online. And I would die if I ever had to go to a branch near where they live, because that would take me 2 days or whatever. So all these things is all the normal financial transactions will be online. The only exception I can see is in live events. You can imagine that if you're getting married or having a child or buying a house, that also from psychology, it's not only practical, it's also from psychology that this is a big moment in your life. You want to see a real person. And so my guess is there will be branches then, and they will be filled with better specialists, because then you really have some complex questions. And finally, what you need, if you make everything virtual, is you need to put an emphasis on financial education, because normally in the old days the local bank would be able to help you, and the local banker would know you and have been there for 20 years. If you make everything virtual, you have to make sure that your clients actually know what they're doing. And there I see a role not only for banks, by the way, but for the financial sector and the public authorities.
Okay, so look, Wim, it's time now for our round of rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I am.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start my own clock here. You've got 90 seconds. You can give me just one word answers. Is absolutely fine. So off we go. What fintech segment for you has the biggest potential over the next 5 years?
Payments.
What is the biggest pain point in your everyday financial life that you'd like to see resolved?
Complexity.
You can pass if you have to. Okay. Do you think we're at the beginning, middle, or end of the fintech wave?
Middle.
Should banks have a metaverse strategy?
They should.
Do you think EU and US regulations have kept pace with all the new behaviors and possibilities we're seeing in the financial industry today?
Impossible for them.
How would you describe non-fungible tokens, NFTs? Are they A, a scam, B, an interesting concept, or C, part of the future that we really mustn't miss out on?
Part of the future, but can be a scam.
Have you ever invested in crypto?
I have.
Are physical points of sales part of the future of finance?
Yes, for live events.
Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 the highest, how would you rate the chances that in the next 10 years, first of all, that one of the neobanks will be as profitable as a top-tier legacy bank?
10.
CBDC, central bank digital currencies, become a mainstream reality in the US or EU, not just in China?
10, absolutely.
That you'll be able to open a crypto account at a top-tier bank in parallel or instead of a cash or fiat account?
8.
Swift. Oh, we are out of time, so we're going to stop there. So thank you so much.
Beautiful little bell there.
That's my phone. I'm going to switch it off now. Thank you, Wim, European Banking Federation CEO, for taking the time. I'm going to switch this off. For joining me today and for speaking to us and sharing your views.
Thank you very much, and goodbye, and hopefully see you soon again.
Okay, and for everyone watching, we will be back again next week with another big name from the world of finance and technology. We do hope you'll join us again then. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe to the Paris Fintech Forum YouTube channel and to follow us on Twitter at Paris Fin Forum. That's all for now. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.